The Prophet of Fire and Silence, Part 1, The Sentence Against the Rain. He called down fire from heaven, and the nation bowed. But soon after he begged for his own death, fleeing alone through the desert. He faced kings, humiliated prophets of Baal, but was defeated by a simple whisper, "Who is this man?" Elijah, the prophet who shut the heavens, who ran faster than horses, and who discovered that the God of fire also speaks in silence. This is not just the story of Elijah. It is the memory that God raised up one of the greatest prophets in history, a man who walked in power, in holiness, and proved that the voice of the Lord is stronger than any throne or idol. The blazing sun beat down on the dry hills of Israel, turning the ground to embers beneath. Amid the heat that shimmered on the horizon, a man advanced alone, wrapped in a rough, weather-beaten cloak. He carried no weapons, led no guards, but his every step seemed to carry the weight of a sentence against the nation that had exchanged the voice of God for the altars of Baal. In the distance, the palace gates of Samaria loomed, and with them the tension of a confrontation that would change history. As he crossed the ornate corridors, silence fell upon the court. There sat Ahab, seated on a throne of gold and ivory, and beside him stood Jezebel, her eyes as cold as blades. Without hesitation, the prophet raised his voice with authority from heaven. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, there shall neither dew nor rain fall these years, except at my word." A shiver ran through the room. The king felt his spine chill at this audacity. Jezebel, though silent, cast a venomous look, silently plotting her revenge. Elijah, without waiting for an answer, turned and left the throne plunged into murmurs and fear. As he crossed the gates, the sky began to part, as if the hand of God himself was sweeping away the last clouds, sealing the sentence of drought. Part 2, The Brook and the Widow. Guided by a firm, gentle voice, Elijah set out eastward, hiding beside the brook Chariot, among rocks and cliffs. There, the prophet became a living witness to a providence that bordered on the impossible. Morning and evening, black wings pierced the sky, ravens bringing bread and meat sent directly by the Lord. The stream's crystal-clear water sustained his life, while the world outside crumbled to dust. But even surrounded by the miracle, Elijah carried deep anxieties. Israel was sunk in idolatry. There, far from the threats of men, Elijah was cared for directly by the hands of God. The nights were cold and silent. The starry sky testified to the solitude of that man of God. The stream, with its clear waters, quenched his thirst day after day. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. Elijah slowly noticed that the stream, his miraculous source of water, was diminishing, reflecting the intensity of the drought he himself had foretold. The once abundant bed was now only a narrow stream, until one day the last trickle of water dried up completely, leaving only hot stones and dry dust where life had once flowed. In that moment of trial, when it seemed as if divine provision itself had ceased, Elijah once again heard the voice of the Lord, clear and gentle, indicating the next step: "Arise, Elijah, and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. I have commanded a widow to give you food." With his heart divided between faith and doubt, Elijah set out again, walking under the scorching sun that beat down on the parched land. As he advanced towards Zarephath, thoughts invaded his mind, questioning how God could use someone as unlikely as a foreign widow to sustain him in such difficult times. Upon reaching the city gates, Elijah saw a humble woman, dressed in weather-worn clothes, gathering sticks from the ground. Her face bore the marks of suffering and hunger. A pale, weak child accompanied her, clutching its mother's hand as if seeking protection from death itself. Elijah, moved by deep compassion, slowly approached and asked for water. When the woman moved away to get it, he dared to ask for more. "Please bring me a piece of bread as well." The woman stopped, turned slowly, and answered with sadness and despair in her voice, "As the Lord, your living God lives, I have no bread at all, only a handful of flour in a bowl and a little oil in a jug. I am gathering sticks to prepare the last meal for myself and my son. After that, all we can do is wait for death." Standing before that woman, Elijah felt the weight of the decision he had to make. His heart wavered for a moment, but he knew that faith required more than just belief. It required action, courage, and absolute trust in divine provision. Taking a deep breath, Elijah responded calmly and confidently, "Do not be afraid. First make a small loaf for me, and then make some for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, the flour will not run out, nor will the oil run dry, until rain falls on the land." Finally, with quiet, humble trust, she obeyed. As she returned home and prepared the bread, she witnessed the impossible. The flour mysteriously multiplied in the bowl, and the oil continued to flow from the jar like a spring that would never run dry. Elijah, seeing the miracle unfold before his eyes, understood a profound truth. Even in the most unlikely places, God was at work. Even in the midst of famine and suffering, there was room for hope and faith. Part 3. The Breath of Life. But what Elijah did not yet know was that this miracle was only the beginning. An even greater test was about to come, testing his faith to the limit and revealing the astonishing power of a God who responds with fire and life. The miraculous provision in the widow's house brought a breath of hope to that place where death seemed to have taken root deep. But then came a day that would change everything. Morning dawned brightly, illuminating the room where Elijah meditated in silence. Suddenly, anguished screams shattered that peace. The widow appeared at the door, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror, holding her son's lifeless body in her arms. Elijah immediately felt his heart ache as he realized what was happening. "Man of God," the widow cried, her voice choked with pain and anger, "why have you come here? Was it to expose my sins before your God? Was it to bring death into my house?" Her words struck Elijah hard, wounding him as no sword ever could. Wordless to respond to the accusation of that desperate mother, Elijah reached out, gently taking the boy's body, and slowly climbed the stairs to his room. Each step weighed on his soul like an eternity of doubts and silent pleas. Entering the room, he carefully placed the boy on his own bed, where he had prayed and spoken to God so many nights. Alone, amid the silence that surrounded him, Elijah allowed himself to weep. His voice, once firm and prophetic, now trembled under the weight of anguish as he cried out to the God he knew so intimately. "Oh, Lord, my God, why have you allowed this misfortune to befall this woman? She has been so kind to me. Lord, don't let her suffer like this." His prayer was a mixture of desperation and boldness. And in that moment, Elijah did something never before seen, something as strange as it was radical. He stretched himself over the boy's cold body, covering him with the warmth of his own body, and cried out with renewed strength, "Oh, Lord, my God, I beg you, restore this boy's life." But nothing happened. The room remained silent except for the faint wind that swayed the curtains. Elijah felt fear tighten in his chest, but he decided to press on, driven by desperate faith. Once again, he stretched himself out over the boy and prayed, pleading with every fiber of his being, "God of Israel, I know you are here. Bring this boy back to life." And again, silence met him with indifference. Determined, Elijah tried a third time. His voice rose in a deep, passionate cry that echoed off the walls of the house and the heavens above. "O Lord my God, hear the voice of your servant and restore life to this boy." At that moment, something inexplicable happened. The boy slowly opened his eyes, breathing calmly, as if gently awakening after a long sleep. The prophet quickly descended the stairs, bringing the lively and energetic boy back into his mother's arms. When she saw her son, the woman fell to her knees. Raising her tear-stained face, she looked deeply into Elijah's eyes, understanding something that would change her life forever. "Now I know that you are truly a man of God and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true." For Elijah, that moment was more than a simple miracle. It was a powerful confirmation that God was with him, even in the darkest and most incomprehensible moments. Part 4. The Showdown at Carmel. The news spread quickly, traveling by word of mouth throughout the region. But while faith was renewed in that humble home elsewhere, King Ahab and Jezebel continued their relentless persecution of the Lord's prophets. An even greater storm was beginning to gather on the horizon. Elijah would soon be summoned back to the center of this spiritual battle, this time not only to face kings and queens, but to directly challenge false gods in a confrontation that would go down in history. His next journey would require even greater courage, even greater faith. And as he gazed up at the sky that night, Elijah felt the presence of God whisper in his spirit that history was just beginning. The man who had brought life to a dead boy in Zarephath was about to face the greatest battle of his life. An epic clash between the fire of heaven and the cold altars of false gods. For Elijah knew that when God spoke, even the dead could live again, and that certainty was all he needed to move forward. The sun rose in a pale, unforgiving sky, casting its rays over a cracked and thirsty land. 3 years had passed since Elijah had spoken before King Ahab the words that had closed the heavens. Now every breath of wind whispered suffering. Every face Elijah encountered bore the marks of the devastating drought. Famine ravaged the kingdom of Israel, consuming even the strongest. And Elijah knew the time had come for the decisive confrontation. It was time to return to Ahab. With firm steps and burning eyes, Elijah walked the dusty roads towards Samaria. In his heart, a mixture of expectation and apprehension boiled. With each step, he remembered the heavy silence of those years of drought, the anguished prayers of the people, and he felt deeply the responsibility of his mission. On the way, a familiar figure appeared before him. Obadiah, the king's steward, a man faithful to the God of Israel, recognized Elijah immediately. His eyes widened in surprise and fear, and he fell to the ground with a trembling and distressed voice. "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" The prophet answered firmly, "It is I. Go tell King Ahab that Elijah is here." Obadiah, overcome with fear, pleaded, "What have I done wrong that you would put me to death? The king has searched for you in every corner of the world. If I tell him you are here and the Lord takes you somewhere else, I will surely be killed." But Elijah, with a resolute look in his eyes, assured him, "As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will present myself before King Ahab this very day." Reluctantly, but trusting the prophet's word, Obadiah set off quickly, carrying the message that could cost him his life. Hours later, Ahab, mounted in his royal chariot, approached with fury in his eyes. Seeing Elijah in the distance, he shouted angrily, "Is it you, troubler of Israel?" The prophet's answer came immediately and sharp as a sword. "It is not I who trouble Israel, but you and your father's house, who have forsaken the Lord and followed Baal. Summon all the people to Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table." The king, overcome by a mixture of wounded pride and dark curiosity, accepted the challenge. Soon all Israel would gather to witness something never before seen. On the appointed day, a silent crowd covered the slopes of Mount Carmel, eagerly awaiting the promised confrontation. Elijah walked slowly toward the people, his gaze roaming over haggard and confused faces. Souls divided between God and false idols. His voice echoed loud and clear across the mountain. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." But a heavy silence answered him. The people were divided, too frightened to respond. Then Elijah proposed the ultimate test: bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal will prepare theirs, and I will prepare mine. We will call upon our gods, and he who answers with fire will be the true God. The people nodded with expectation, and the prophets of Baal began their ritual. From dawn until noon, they shouted and shouted frantically, dancing around the altar they had built, but nothing happened. No voice answered, no fire appeared. Elijah, watching them with a mixture of irony and compassion, began to taunt them. "Shout louder. Perhaps Baal is busy or traveling. Perhaps he is sleeping and needs to be awakened." Overcome with desperation, the false prophets cut themselves with sharp blades, letting their blood flow onto the arid ground, begging for an answer that would never come. Finally, exhausted and humiliated, they gave up. Elijah's turn had come. The prophet approached slowly with the calm of one who knows God is with him. He carefully rebuilt the altar of the Lord with 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. He dug a deep trench around the altar. Then he ordered water to be poured on the altar, not once, but 3 times, until the wood was soaked and the trench filled. As the crowd watched in astonishment, Elijah looked up to heaven, took a deep breath, and cried out with all his heart, "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all this at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people may know that you are the true God and that you are bringing their hearts back to you." At that very moment, the sky suddenly darkened, as if eternity itself held its breath. A powerful noise split the silence, and a fiery bolt of lightning descended violently upon the altar, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and completely drying up the seawater. A murmur of astonishment ran through the crowd. Then hundreds of voices began to shout in unison, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Elijah ordered the prophets of Baal to be arrested. They were led to the Kishon stream, where they were executed, removing the stain of idolatry from that place. And while the people were still trying to absorb the magnitude of the miracle, Elijah raised his eyes to heaven again and realized that his mission was not yet complete. The time had come to open the heavens again, bringing life and hope to the people who had just witnessed God's power. High atop Mount Carmel, Elijah bowed low to the ground and began to pray fervently. He asked his servant to look toward the sea, but the servant saw nothing. Elijah didn't give up. 7 times he ordered the servant to look again, and on the 7th time, the servant exclaimed, "I see a small cloud the size of a man's hand rising from the sea." Elijah smiled. He knew the rain was coming, not just to water the land, but to wash the parched souls of Israel. He rose, ready to run once more before Ahab's chariot, to proclaim that the God of Israel was true, merciful, and powerful. Part 5. The Whisper in the Cave. But little did Elijah imagine that the greatest storm of his life was about to begin. The confrontation with Jezebel approached, confronting him with his greatest internal battle, testing the depths of his faith, his fear, and his courage. The rain fell violently, sweeping away the dust accumulated from 3 years of drought, washing away the blood of the prophets of Baal, as if the heavens were weeping for the nation that was beginning to awaken. As the waters fell in torrents, Elijah ran ahead of King Ahab's chariot, enveloped in supernatural strength, crossing the hills with quick and determined steps toward Jezreel. But despite the recent victory at Carmel, the prophet knew the conflict was far from over. That night, within the palace walls, another storm was gathering. King Ahab hurried in, still shaken by the sight of heavenly fire consuming the altar. He found Jezebel, the powerful and ruthless queen, seated with piercing eyes that seemed to pierce his soul. Hesitantly, Ahab recounted the events of Carmel, detailing in a shaky voice how Elijah had humiliated the prophets of Baal and executed them by the brook Kishon. As she listened, Jezebel clenched her fists, anger flaring in her heart. Her authority had been affronted, her God humiliated. In a cold, venomous voice, she summoned a messenger and sent Elijah a direct threat. "May the gods punish me severely if I do not do to you by this time tomorrow as you did to the prophets of Baal." The message reached the still-tired prophet, under the precarious shelter of a makeshift tent. Upon hearing it, a wave of inexplicable terror washed over him. Elijah, who had just seen fire fall from the sky, who had single-handedly faced hundreds of enemies, now felt the crushing weight of a threat that seemed personal, inevitable, and deadly. In his mind, Jezebel's voice echoed like a drum, endlessly repeating the promise of vengeance. Overcome by irrational fear, Elijah hurriedly arose and fled. Leaving his servant behind, he set out alone, driven by an anguish he had never felt before. Days of frantic walking brought him to the desert of Beersheba. Exhausted and disoriented, he threw himself into the scant shade of a solitary tree and cried out to heaven with a broken voice and tearful eyes. "Enough, Lord, take my life now, for I am no better than my fathers." There, at the end of his tether, Elijah experienced the solitude of his mission as never before. All the victories, the miracles, the epic confrontations seemed distant, almost unreal. His soul was weighed down by a profound weariness, an emptiness that nothing seemed to fill. He fell into a deep sleep under the tree, hoping never to awaken. But as he slept, a gentle touch awakened him. Elijah slowly opened his eyes, and before him stood a radiant-looking being, an angel sent directly from the throne of God. With a firm but compassionate voice, the angel spoke, "Arise and eat." Elijah noticed warm bread on stones and a pitcher of fresh water beside him. Obediently, he ate and drank, feeling the gentle energy course through his weary body. He fell asleep again and was awakened once more by the angel with insistent and urgent words. "Arise again, Elijah, for the journey ahead is very long." As he arose, invigorated by the heavenly nourishment, Elijah understood that his mission was not yet over. The angel was right. There was a long journey ahead, and something deeper than fear or doubt drove him. Now, for 40 days and 40 nights, Elijah walked through the arid and silent desert, crossing forgotten lands and inhospitable landscapes, until he reached Mount Horeb, the same mountain where God had revealed himself to Moses centuries before. There, sheltered in a dark, cold cave, Elijah plunged into deep reflection. His mind was burdened with agonizing doubts and insistent questions. He had given everything he had, but Israel remained divided. Jezebel remained in power, and idolatry seemed unshakable. Then, amid the absolute silence, a soft voice, almost a whisper, resounded within the cave. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" His heart aching with emotion, the prophet responded with brutal sincerity, "I have been zealous for the Lord, God of hosts. But the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, destroyed your altars, and killed your prophets. I alone am left, and now they seek my life as well." God's answer came not in immediate words, but in stunning signs. First, a violent wind tore through the mountain, shattering rocks with terrifying force, but God was not in the wind. Then came an earthquake, shaking everything around, but God was not in the earthquake. A mighty fire consumed the earth before the cave, but God was not in the fire either. Finally, after the tumult, an absolute, almost palpable silence filled the space. It was in this deep, intimate silence that Elijah felt the real and comforting presence of God. He understood then something he would never forget. God was not only in the great and visible miracles, but also in the calm, persistent whisper of his inner voice. Reverently, Elijah covered his face with his cloak and waited. The gentle voice spoke again with the tenderness of a father speaking to a dejected son. "Return on your way, Elijah. You are not alone. I have reserved for myself 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed the knee to Baal." Those words filled Elijah's heart with indescribable relief. He realized his isolation was an illusion, that his calling was part of a greater plan. The God who spoke through fire also whispered in the silence, who knew his weakness and his fears, and yet sent him back to the spiritual battlefield. Elijah emerged from the cave, ready to resume his journey. His mission was still far from over. God would now lead him to meet a young man named Elisha, who would be his successor and companion, a disciple who would continue the prophetic legacy, facing storms he himself had never imagined. Elijah walked now strengthened by the divine whisper, determined to press on to the end, knowing he would never be alone, not even in the face of the darkest challenges yet to come. Part 6. The mantle passed, Elijah left the silence of the cave and descended the mountain with firm and resolute steps. The fear that had previously paralyzed him had dissipated like mist at sunrise. In his heart now burned a new certainty. God had never abandoned him, even in the darkest moments of his journey. With renewed clarity, he set out toward the fertile valley of Abel-Meholah, where God was sending him to meet the one who would be his successor. Elisha, upon reaching the verdant plains, Elijah spotted a young man working tirelessly in the field. Elisha skillfully guided 12 yoke of oxen, displaying remarkable vigor and determination for his age. Watching him from afar, Elijah immediately understood why God had chosen this man. Elisha was not only physically strong, but also exuded an aura of purpose and commitment to the simple life he lived. Without a word, Elijah approached silently, wrapped in his characteristic prophetic mantle. The young Elisha sensed a powerful presence behind him and slowly turned. Their eyes met in a profound instant, marked by a silent, supernatural understanding. Then, in a symbolic gesture charged with meaning, Elijah threw his mantle over the young Elisha's shoulders. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Elisha felt the spiritual weight and responsibility contained within that rough fabric. Intuitively knowing that his life would never be the same again, he looked at Elijah with surprised, questioning eyes, but also with silent acceptance. Finally finding his voice, Elisha spoke in a respectful yet hesitant tone. "Let me first say goodbye to my father and mother, and then I will follow you." Elijah nodded slightly, acknowledging the seriousness of the request, and said calmly, "Go and come back. Just remember what I did to you." Elisha quickly returned to his family, but not to reconsider his decision. Instead, he prepared a final meal with his oxen, burning the wood from the plow itself to cook the meat. This symbolic gesture showed that Elisha was ready to completely leave his former life, with no plans or desire to return. After bidding his family an emotional farewell, Elisha set out to accompany Elijah. From that moment on, he became not just a disciple, but a determined apprentice, absorbing every word, every gesture, every lesson from the most powerful prophet Israel had ever known. The following days were filled with long walks and deep conversations. Elijah shared with Elisha stories of the miracles he witnessed and the spiritual battles he waged against the forces of idolatry in Israel. Elisha listened with reverence and attention, his heart shaped by his mentor's wisdom and unwavering faith. But as the connection between master and apprentice grew, the political and spiritual situation in Israel rapidly deteriorated. Jezebel continued to spread her evil influence throughout the kingdom, strengthening the worship of Baal and intensifying the persecution of the followers of the true God. Elijah knew the end of his earthly journey was near and that he needed to prepare Elisha not only to continue his prophetic ministry, but also to face even more difficult challenges. One night, under the glittering stars that decorated the dark sky, Elijah opened his heart to the young apprentice, revealing to him the difficult truths of the mission he was about to undertake. In a calm but intense voice, Elijah warned him, "Elisha, the path you are choosing will not be easy. You will face wicked kings, idolatry rampant, and a people constantly divided. But if you are faithful to the end, God will use you to accomplish even greater things than I have seen myself." Elisha looked at Elijah with eyes full of determination. His heart raced at those words, but he did not waver. Instead, in a firm, deep voice, he replied, "Master, I will follow you to the end. All I desire is a double portion of the Spirit that rests upon you." Elijah looked at the young man with admiration and fatherly affection. He understood the weight of that request, an immense responsibility that Elisha dared to desire. Finally, with a small smile, Elijah replied, "You have asked the difficult thing. However, if you see me when I am taken away from you, it will be so. Otherwise, your request will not be fulfilled." In the following days, they traveled together through the cities and villages of Israel: Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho. At each place, Elijah gently tested Elisha's loyalty, suggesting that he stay behind. But Elisha, stubborn and faithful, always responded with the same conviction, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." Finally, they reached the banks of the Jordan River, whose waters flowed silently and deeply. Elijah took his cloak, carefully rolled it up, and struck the waters with divine authority. The river immediately parted before them, forming a dry path. The two crossed slowly, aware that this moment marked the end of one stage and the beginning of another. On the other side of the Jordan, a dense atmosphere of expectation enveloped them. Elijah looked at Elisha with a mixture of pride and melancholy. The moment of separation was near, and they could both feel it. Then, without warning, the sky above him opened in a spectacle of light and supernatural power. A chariot of fire, drawn by equally fiery horses, descended swiftly from the sky, separating master from disciple. A furious whirlwind arose around Elijah, lifting him higher and higher, ever farther from the earth. Elisha, overcome with emotion and awe, cried out in a loud voice, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." In an instant, Elijah disappeared into the sky, leaving Elisha alone, gazing into infinity, while the prophet's mantle slowly fell to the ground at the young disciple's feet. Elisha bent down, carefully gathered the mantle, and held it to his chest, feeling the weight of the legacy, the divine responsibility, and the profound love for the man who had changed his life forever. Now it would be up to Elisha to continue the prophetic mission, confront idolatry, perform miracles, and carry forward the powerful message of the living God. Elisha's prophetic journey was just beginning, and he knew more than ever that he would never be alone. For the same God who was with Elijah would always be with him.